That day, Simon Roberts woke up earlier than usual. The man always woke up at dawn, but that day he had an important event planned that needed his attention. Simon washed up quickly and drank a cup of coffee, after which he called Kevin Hall, whom he'd known for several years. Despite the early hour, the assistant's voice sounded cheerful, as if he had been on his feet for a long time. "Good morning, Kevin. Please tell me that everything's ready. Will everything go as planned?" he asked. "Yes, Mr. Roberts, everything will go as planned. The time of the reunion remains the same, too. There have been no changes," Kevin said readily. The assistant's report made Simon smile with satisfaction. Now all he had to do was wait until the evening to implement his plan. Having thanked Kevin for his assistance, Simon started getting ready for work. The man knew that he had a lot to do that day, and in order to finish everything in time, he would need to put in a lot of effort. After kissing his sleeping wife and son goodbye, Simon stepped out onto the street and headed for the Dodge parked nearby. Back in his youth, he could only see such cars in magazines, which he loved reading to learn all about the new car models. 20 years have passed since then, but it still seemed like it was just yesterday. Simon started the engine and carefully drove out of the parking lot. Thoughts of what he had to go through during his school years still haunted Simon, causing a persistent feeling of discomfort. Unbeknownst to himself, Simon plunged into his memories that took him back 20 years. He didn't have a car back then, and all the means of transportation available to him was an old bicycle, which his mother bought him at a flea market. Simon Schwinn's bicycle was so old and beat up that he spent more time repairing it than actually riding. Nevertheless, Simon never lost heart and firmly believed that one day everything would change and prosperity and financial stability would become a part of his life. Simon Roberts' childhood was spent in poverty. He remembered well the times when he had to work at a car wash so he could afford to buy himself a school uniform. The man didn't remember much about his father because he died in a car accident when Simon was only 3 years old. Left alone with his mother and younger sister, Simon quickly learned all about the problems that poverty and destitution entailed. To provide for her 2 children, Pamela had to work 16 hours a day, performing the duties of both the janitor and the gardener at a local school. Thanks to the school's principal, who hired the single mother for both jobs, she managed to make ends meet and provide her kids with the basics. But everything changed when Simon went to school. His classmates immediately noticed that the poor boy stood out from the rest of them, being always dressed in cheap clothes bought at flea markets and thrift stores. Simon never had any pocket money, so he couldn't afford to get sweets or pastries at school, as other kids did. Nevertheless, his mother did give him a handful of change to get lunch. However, Simon rarely spent this money, trying to save up enough to get himself a set of gym clothes for PE. Time passed, and the older Simon got, the more acutely he felt the difference in social settings between him and his peers. Children are often cruel to those who don't look like them. Thus, his classmates often brought Simon to tears with their mocking and bullying. But the boy never shared any of it with his mother. He didn't want to upset the woman by telling her that he was mocked for being the cleaning lady's son. Trying to defend his honor, Simon often got into fights, which usually ended up in the same way. He always got the blame and ended up in the principal's office. Fortunately, things never got serious enough for him to get expelled, which made Pamela Roberts incredibly happy, since she really didn't want her son to have to change schools, nor did she want to look for a new job. During the day, she cleaned up the halls and classrooms inside the school, and in the evenings, she cleaned the yard, sweeping it and picking up the trash. The woman was probably aware of the fact that her son was having a hard time at school, but there was nothing she could do to change the family situation for the better. Pamela Roberts was a one-man woman, so even when several years had passed since the death of her husband, she remained faithful to him. Maybe if Simon's mother found a new love, the boy's life would have changed for the better, but he could only dream of that. In the meantime, Simon tried to help his mother in any way he could. He even stayed at school after classes to help her wash the floors. "Thank you, dear. You're always so supportive and helpful. You fill my heart with love," Mrs. Roberts used to say, hugging her son. At such moments, Simon felt like a real hero who could do anything. But that feeling didn't last long. It quickly got replaced by the realization of the harsh reality in which he wasn't a hero at all, but the most ordinary boy from a poor family. What Simon found the most hurtful, however, was the fact that his teacher took the side of the rich kids from his class. Penelope Miller was sure that the son of the cleaning lady would never make it in life and believed that he would live in poverty until the end of his days. One day, she even went so far as to say it out loud in front of the whole class, which made all the other students laugh at Simon. I don't think that people like that are destined for success. Being the son of a cleaning lady isn't a label one can easily get rid of, Mrs. Miller said pointedly during one of her classes. Of course, she didn't specifically mention Simon by the name, but every single student in the class understood who she was talking about. Needless to say, that came as a hard emotional blow for the teenager. After the teacher's words, Simon was literally ready to sink into the ground. The unfortunate teenager was hurt by the teacher's words because she didn't believe that he had even the slightest chance of being successful in life. And that was despite the fact that Simon's grades in some classes were well above the average level. The cleaner's son, the lord of the rags. "Go mop the floor, you stupid beggar." The kids often yelled at him, trying to come up with new and hurtful nicknames for the poor teenager. Simon had to go through a lot before he managed to direct the resentment he felt for his peers to something good. Thus, instead of reacting to the bullying, he decided to direct all of his strength and energy to his education, as he realized that it was his only chance to break out of poverty. Despite the fact that by the time of graduation, Simon had become one of the best students in his year, his teacher, Penelope Miller, still believed that he had no prospects and would become a failure like his mother. For this very reason, Simon decided to skip graduation, rushing to leave school behind, along with all the bullying and negativity. Of course, most of his classmates didn't even realize that Simon wasn't at graduation, while others decided that he skipped the ceremony because he couldn't afford to buy himself a suit. However, while his peers were enjoying the newly found freedom, Simon was busy with something very important. Having applied to several colleges around the country, the young man was hoping to take the next step in his education soon. Fortunately, after a series of rejections, Simon finally got his acceptance letter. He was going to study economics at one of the best universities in the Northeast. After graduating with honors, the determined young man went into business, taking part only in the most promising projects. Ultimately, Simon succeeded in an area that many others had failed in. And now, sitting behind the wheel of his huge SUV, the man was driving to the office of his own company. All of his childhood fears and anxieties were now things of the past, as Simon could finally look confidently into his future. And that was why the successful businessman decided to organize a 20-year class reunion. The most interesting thing was that Simon actually owned the restaurant where the reunion was supposed to take place. That day, the evening simply couldn't come fast enough. Simon knew that he would get to see his classmates, who had probably long forgotten all about him. When the evening came, all the attendees gathered at the restaurant that overlooked the promenade. Penelope Miller was also present at the reunion. She was at a loss, trying to guess who could have organized such a lavish event. Soon, the waiters started serving appetizers and pouring the champagne. Who could have become so successful that they could afford all of this? Mrs. Miller couldn't stop thinking. And then Simon came into the restaurant. He was dressed in an obviously expensive suit. Greeting everyone in a rather restrained manner, The man signaled to the waiters, who then started giving out gift bags to his former classmates. Some of them got watches, while others got all kinds of expensive gadgets and phones. Never ceasing to admire Simon's generosity, the former classmates cheered and applauded him. And only Penelope Miller still couldn't believe that it was the cleaning lady's son who'd become so successful. "Tell me the truth, it's all a prank of some kind, right? You're just playing along for someone else, right?" she asked Simon point blank. Simon smiled in response and said, "No, Mrs. Miller, it's all true. I really did become so successful. Actually, I also own this restaurant and a lot of other things around the city." Simon's words caused a real sensation among his former classmates. Some felt openly jealous, while others, on the contrary, expressed their sincere admiration. Looking at Simon, whose appearance radiated confidence and success, Penelope Miller realized how wrong she was, writing him off as someone without a future. Only by the end of the event did she pluck up the courage to come and ask Simon for forgiveness. Simon smiled again and put his arm around the woman's shoulders. Of course, the businessman didn't hold a grudge against those who didn't believe in him. Now that Simon was successful, all the pain his peers had once caused him felt no worse than a mosquito bite, annoying but insignificant. Leaving the restaurant to the cheers and applause of his former classmates, Simon went home, where his beloved wife was waiting for him to have dinner together. Now that the man had paid tribute to his past, he felt the freedom that he'd never known before. And yet, Simon was convinced that one should never judge a person by their appearance, and someone who was poor and was discerned as insignificant just yesterday could achieve success the next day, reaching the heights unattainable to others.